There's a question I genuinely could not stop thinking about recently. Why did Nintendo music used to feel bigger? Not just louder, not just more nostalgic, but emotionally larger than life. Because growing up with the games like Mario Galaxy, Star Fox Assault, and Zelda, there was this cinematic magic to Nintendo music that felt almost impossible to describe. And honestly, for years I thought it was just nostalgia. But then Nintendo announced the new Star Fox game, and the second that orchestral soundtrack kicked in, I realized something. There's one specific thing Nintendo used to do musically that completely changed how their games felt. And weirdly enough, it might be the reason their older soundtracks still hit so hard emotionally today. Let's start with Mario Galaxy. Now, you cannot talk about Mario Galaxy without talking about Gusty Garden Galaxy and one of my personal favorites, Rosalina's Observatory from Mario Galaxy. Seriously, this track is ridiculous. It's calm, emotional, hopeful, slightly melancholic, and somehow it makes floating around a cartoon space hub feel like the meaning of life itself. But musically, there's a reason it works so well. The orchestra constantly breathes, strings swell naturally, the harmony slowly evolves, the dynamics keep shifting, it feels human. And that's something Nintendo used extremely well during the GameCube and Wii era. Back then, Nintendo wasn't afraid to let their music feel cinematic, grand, emotional, and dramatic. Which is honestly hilarious when you remember these games are technically about a plumber, an elf with anxiety, and a fox in a fighter jet yelling, "Do a barrel roll!" And I think a huge reason those soundtracks still feel special today is live orchestration. Because when real musicians perform together, something happens that's very difficult to recreate digitally. Tiny timing imperfections, bow pressure changing slightly, brass players pushing harder during emotional peaks. The music moves, the music is human. And Nintendo absolutely understood this in games like Mario Galaxy and Star Fox Assault. Assault especially feels fascinating to me musically, because it doesn't just use orchestra for atmosphere, it uses it for storytelling. The brass gives heroism, the strings give the emotional weight, and the percussion gives urgency and scale. Tracks like Space Battleground genuinely sound like something straight out of a sci-fi film. Honestly, at certain moments it feels like Nintendo accidentally summoned Gustav Holst into the recording studio. Especially with those massive brass movements and warlike rhythm figures, you can really hear those Mars, bringer of war influences in places. And that is what made these soundtracks feel larger than life. Now, to be clear, modern Nintendo music is still fantastic. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are beautiful examples of restraint. Sparse piano, ambient textures, silence being used intentionally. And honestly, that style fits those games perfectly. But I also think Nintendo slowly became more careful musically over time. Less melodical, less orchestral, less willing to go full cinematic. And honestly, part of that completely makes sense, because hiring a full live symphonic orchestra is expensive, like really expensive. We're talking dozens upon dozens of world-class musicians, recording stages, conductors, arrangers, orchestrators, mixing engineers. It's basically the musical equivalent of setting your wallet on fire in the most beautiful way imaginable. Which is probably why modern game soundtracks often lean more toward hybrid scores, smaller ensembles, digital orchestration, or more atmospheric minimalism. And to be clear, there is nothing wrong with that. Some modern sample libraries honestly sound incredible nowadays. Half the time, composers are out here turning laptops into fake orchestras through pure wizardry. But even with today's technology, there's still something special about hearing a real orchestra perform together. Which is why hearing the soundtrack of the newly announced Star Fox game completely caught me off guard, because oh my god, the second that music started, I genuinely got chills. Huge strings, heroic brass and massive percussion. Suddenly Star Fox sounded big again. And what really stood out to me immediately was how confident the soundtrack sounded. Like Nintendo finally remembered, oh right, this franchise is supposed to feel like a space opera. The orchestration feels cinematic in a way Nintendo honestly hasn't leaned into enough recently. Big melodic themes, dynamic orchestral movement, and emotional harmonic progression. It doesn't just sound atmospheric, it sounds important. At one point I genuinely thought, did Nintendo secretly ask Joe Hisaishi to emotionally destroy me for 4 minutes? Because for the first time in years, Nintendo music gave me that old feeling again. And I think that's the answer I'd been looking for this whole time. Older Nintendo music didn't just feel different because we were younger. It felt different because Nintendo fully embraced musical storytelling. Big melodies, live orchestra, dynamic performances, and emotional leitmotifs. Their music wasn't afraid to feel important, to take center stage, to take the spotlight. And honestly, I think that emotional cinematic identity is something Nintendo should lean into more often, especially for story-driven games. Because when Nintendo fully commits to orchestral storytelling, they create absolute magic. Anyway, what Nintendo soundtrack gives you that magical feeling? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video and also love cinematic game music, Nintendo nostalgia and orchestral soundtracks, feel free to like the video and subscribe, because we're only just getting started here on this channel. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.